in Elden Ring difficult. In this video, we'll be looking at the difficulty in obtaining every achievement in Elden Ring. I'm dividing up the achievements into sections such as collectibles, like the legendary ornaments, bosses such as the difficulty in killing all the important ones, the endings, and some straightforward ones that you would get by simply playing normally. I'll be rating the difficulty on a scale of 1 to 5, such as 1 being very easy, 2 being easy, 3 being moderate, 4 being hard, and 5 being very hard. And yes, I've gotten all achievements in the game, so I'm not lying when I say I beat Malenia. First, I'll talk about the straightforward achievements. These achievements are earned by just playing the game and going through the story. It includes Gosling Ornament, which is upgrade any ornament to its highest stage, Round Table Hold, which is just simply arrive at the Round Table Hold, and Erdtree Aflame, which is when you use the kindling to set the Erdtree aflame. The only achievement you may have to go out of your way is to fully upgrade an ornament, but apart from that, you will get these achievements by playing through the story, which in itself can be challenging as you have to go through many amounts of bosses. Collectible achievements aren't bad if you simply just watch a video on the locations, but if you're doing it on your own, it can be time consuming and difficult since the world of Elden Ring is pretty huge. Achievements in this category are Legendary Ornaments, which is acquiring all Legendary Ornaments, Legendary Ashen Remains, which is acquiring all Legendary Ashen Remains, Legendary Sorceries and Incantations, which is acquiring all Legendary Sorceries and Incantations, Legendary Talismans, which is acquiring all Legendary Talismans, and Great Rune, which is restoring the power of a Great Rune, which isn't really a collectible, but you can easily miss it if you don't explore enough in Stormveil Castle. Some of these collectibles you do have to fight some bosses at the end of a dungeon to obtain them, and also you have to go through Ranni's questline. Most of these you can get during any time in the game, except for the Bolt of Grandsax, which could be missed if you defeat Maliketh. Ideally, you can get all these in one playthrough, unless you're like me, and you sold the Incantation and also missed the Bolt of Grandsax, which then you would have to go to New Game Plus to get the rest. Many of the bosses in the game can be difficult. Some of the ones that are the most difficult are obviously the ones that you need to defeat to get all the achievements. I'll start with Margit the Fell Omen, which for a starting boss can be difficult as his moveset can be a lot for players, especially if you're not familiar with Souls games, which I was not familiar with. My first time fighting him took a couple of times, and I used the Dying Dragon Kali to level up to gain a better advantage, and no, I'm not proud of this. Godric can be challenging. From how I see it, his moveset is much more bearable to deal with and get more used to, but he can be overwhelming when you first encounter him. Nevertheless, it did not take me that long to beat him. Red Wolf of Radagon isn't hard but not easy. You'll most likely die the first time, but his moves are pretty basic, and at this point in the game you most likely would have gotten better at dodging, especially if you had beaten Margit and Godric. Rennala has two phases with full health, but the first one is really easy and the second one is still easy. If you're a melee user, as long as you keep running after her and pressuring her, she gets staggered really easily and proves to be an easier boss compared to others. Royal Knight Loretta was a pain to fight, but she's a boss that becomes easier the more times you dive to her, and then once you fight her other version Loretta, Knight of the Haliku Tree, you already know how to beat her. This version isn't too different, unless you still struggle heavily fighting her. I think she's not that hard of a boss now, but for your first time she is a difficult boss. The thing about Dragonkin, the Soldier of Nazgella, is when I fought him, I was over leveled since I beat the story and also beat Malenia at this point in the game. I also assumed that if you explore better than me, then you may have had a hard time fighting him. But I didn't see a second phase, so I really don't know much about this boss fight. The Valiant Gargoyles is difficult unless you do a lot of damage. If you kill the first one fast enough, it just becomes another 1v1, which isn't too bad since their movesets aren't too complicated. But the first tries of this boss can be nerve-wracking and stressful, especially the first time you get the first Gargoyle's health to half. Radahn is a scary boss. He can be difficult for your average player, especially if you don't use torrents or any NPC summons. I used torrent and the NPC summons to beat him, and that still took some time. The crazy thing is too that he was even harder before he got patched, so good job to the people who did beat him before he was patched. Leon Misbegotten is a straightforward boss and not really difficult. You'll probably die for the first couple of times, but get used to his moves pretty quickly, and to be honest, I forgot a lot of the time he's even an achievement boss. Gosket Noble really isn't that difficult in my opinion, except the move where he rolls around can be very annoying, but it's really just one of those bosses that doesn't take too long to beat. Rykard is a gimmick boss, so as long as you pick up the Serpent Hunter, he's pretty easy. He does have some annoying attacks, but you may not even have to see some of those attacks if you just stagger him a lot with the Serpent Hunter. Magma is one of the more forgettable bosses for me, because he isn't hard or easy. If you just stay close to him, you avoid a good amount of his attacks, and you can just keep on attacking him. Asel, Natural Born the Void, is one of those bosses with a lot of AoE, and he is massive. Is he hard? Yes, I would say he is, but luckily he doesn't have too many attacks. I would say he is a pain to fight, especially in the first playthrough. Elimir if I pronounce that right. I don't really remember this boss at all. Bosses that fight once you're over leveled feels like a normal enemy, but I think even if you fought him when you weren't, I don't think he is a difficult one. But then again, I can't be too sure. Commander Neil does seem scary at first, but once you move the two spirits that help him and he reaches second phase, his attacks are not that hard to dodge. At least for me it wasn't. His attacks felt more slow, more easy to time. And at the end of a jump attack animation, you can cause him to miss one of his attacks. But I did hear that a good amount of people did struggle on this fight, but personally, he was not that hard for me. Mimic Tier, you're literally fighting yourself, so however annoying your build is depends on you. I used the good old reliable strength build, so it wasn't that difficult. Regional Ancestor Spirit and Ancestor Spirit are pretty much the same boss. They aren't difficult other than the fact that they can heal a lot if you allow them to. Again, this is another boss that I fought when I was over leveled. Godfrey First Elden Lord is actually pretty easy. His attacks are not too complicated to dodge, other than his stomp, which threw me off a bit, but I was able to beat him in my first try. At this point in the game, you would feel more comfortable with dodging. Of course, that is until right after you have to fight Morgott. He is a hard boss. His moves can be fast or he can stall his attacks. Feels like he won't even let you breathe, at least that's how I felt. He also has the second phase, which makes him even more annoying. I lucked out in his second phase where before he reached it, I was able to output a lot of damage, so I was able to finish him off before he used any of his second phase attacks, although he is an enjoyable boss fight. Some people say the Fire Giant was easy, but he's one of the bosses in the game I actually took a while to beat, especially since he has so much defense and doesn't take a lot of damage. He's definitely a challenging boss when you first fight him, but once you learn on his moves, it's just a matter of dodging most of his attacks, unless of course you try to cheese him instead. Glasskin Duo is another 1v2 scenario that makes it difficult, unless of course you use a sleeping pot, it becomes way more easier. It is most definitely a hard boss if you try to pull off the 1v2 with no help of items, unless you're just that good. Malekith is a boss that made me use Mimic Tier. Some people find him not that hard, others find him harder than Malenia. I would say I'm in the middle, but the most annoying thing about him is he's able to inflict damage over time, remove some of your HP permanently if the Black Flame is still on you. But a really cool boss, 10 out of 10, we recommend it. From here on out, yes, I did use Mimic Tier, which basically turns the game to easy mode. I was so close to finishing the story, I decided to just beeline it. I know it's not honorable, I apologize. Hoarah is a badass boss. First phase, you simply fight Godfrey with an extra move or two. Then in second phase, Hoarah is what the real challenge is. His attacks are fast, and he has like 2 moves, I think, where he can pick you up and deplete your HP by a lot. I would say it's a hard boss, but it's definitely one of the fun ones. You would think Radagon or the Elden Beast also would count for achievements, but I'm just finding out myself that they don't. Magda Omen is more of a moderate difficult boss, but of course his actual boss fight where he has a second phase is another story. I beat Malenia before I beat him, so I once again was over leveled and I used Mimic Tier, so it was really easy. But I understand how hard he really is if you truly fight him. Lich Dragon is basically a dragon boss with our torrent and a hell lot of lightning, and he can also inflict insta-death. You get to him by simply doing Fia's questline, which I found out you can still do it even after burning the Earth Tree, which is awesome. If you fight Dragon Lord Placidusax before some of the other bosses, I can see how hard he can be. His attacks look insane and it's another big boss without mount, but you can get through it after a good amount of attempts. At last, we finally reached what most people would say is the hardest boss in the game. Malenia Blade of Miquella is a really hard boss, which surprise surprise, I didn't use Mimic Tier. I actually think Mimic Tier is not good for this boss and she heals every time she lands an attack. I just went lightweight, learned all of her attacks, and took my time with the boss fight, which sounds easy when you put it like that, but her waterfowl dance is still scary, along with the other attacks she does in her second phase where clones of her attack you. But the biggest thing about this boss is that her 2 phases start with full HP. If you dedicate a good amount of time fighting her though, she is very beatable. Now, that was all the bosses you have to beat to get all the achievements, which many of them can be challenging, also the fact that there's a lot of them. Most achievements in this game is actually just beating bosses. There are 3 endings you have to do to get all the achievements: Elden Lord, Age of the Stars, and Lord of Frenzied Flame. The ending you can get by doing Fia's questline isn't needed. Elden Lord ending is simple, just beat the game as you would and don't summon Ranni if you did her questline. Age of the Stars ending is probably the hardest ending to achieve simply because you have to fight Radahn and Astel and even Blad, which, well, he isn't really that hard of a mini boss. This ending is the one you would go to for the most work, but other way you would have to do it if you want to get the achievements by beating Radahn and Astel. All you have to do to get the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending is to go to the sewers of Lindell and defeat Mog and go slightly through an annoying platforming sequence. Then you touch something and boom, you have the Frenzy Flame. This is the last ending you should do because once you get the Frenzy Flame, you're stuck with it unless you do an extra step to remove it. You can actually do all endings in one playthrough if you create a backup save before ending the game. I chose the long route and just did 2 more playthroughs to get the endings. That was all the achievements in Elden Ring. Most of the achievements are having to beat bosses, the rest are collectibles and endings. The hardest thing about getting all of them are obviously the bosses, since there are many and a lot of them are challenging. Although a good amount of these bosses can be beaten if you use things like a mimic tier, spells, or other brokenness this game has to offer. Grinding and overleveling can also give you a huge advantage. To get all the achievements, I would say the difficulty is 4. The game is challenging, but the amount of things you can do to help you makes it a lot easier. But at the end of the day, the difficulty of this game depends on the way you play, which is the beauty of Elden Ring. Either challenge yourself or just enjoy the awesomeness that is Elden Ring. Thank you for all watching the video or stopping by. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, sub if you enjoyed my content, and leave a comment below of your thoughts on the rating or your thoughts of some of the bosses. Thank you again for watching.